There's only one life. You've got to make the most of it.
Why was impact so important to you?
Instead of being a conformist, you have to make your choices in an authentic manner.
How do you define contribution?
Commitment, I think, is the more important keyword here than resilience.
What's your formula for bouncing back? Welcome back to Mork Unfiltered, folks. From the Himalayan frontiers to Europe's boardrooms, Aseem Sadana has charted a path that's as unpredictable as it is purposeful. An INSEAD alumnus, scale-up expert, and private equity operator, Aseem is currently the COO of Health Hero, Europe's largest digital healthcare provider, built through 6 acquisitions across 4 countries in under 7 months. But beyond the titles and traction, Aseem is someone who's chased meaning over money and purpose over prestige. Whether trekking into ancient tribal lands at the tender age of 18 or navigating the high-stakes pivots of entrepreneurship, today we dive into the messy middle of his career, the battles, the breakthroughs, and what it truly means to be unstoppable. This is Mork Unfiltered, and this is Aseem Sadana. Welcome to the show, Aseem. It's great to have you here.
Hello, Patrick. It's amazing to see you. Thank you for reconnecting. And this is going to be a lovely conversation with my long-lost friend from INSEAD, I must add.
Absolutely. It is crazy that we have known each other for 26 years. I mean, can you believe that? 26 years? It's nuts.
Yeah, how
it's
flies.
Crazy. It
Yeah.
does fly. It does fly. But, it's kind of like when I look at how much time has passed, I'm obviously impressed by all the things that you've done. And, one of the things that I love about this show is that I'm able to interview fascinating people like you. And one of the things that they all have in common is, this jagged, crazy line being kind of a little bit all over the place in terms of all the interesting things that they've done. And it's particularly fascinating because I think, we're in an age where, artificial intelligence is redefining everything. People's careers are changing more quickly than ever. And oftentimes what you get is people asking, well, what should I be doing with my life? Where does my career go next? Or what is my career? Right. And so in your case, I kind of want to redial back the clock, right? Many years ago, as you and I discussed in our previous call, part of your career and kind of your realization as a professional, as a man, started with this incredible expedition at the tender age of 18 in the Himalayan mountains. Tell us about that expedition, where it came from, what it was, and why you decided to do this.
Of course. Patrick, I've always followed my heart. And I'll answer your question. But, when we talk about careers and trajectories, I find it a bit unfortunate that people think of these things in rather conventional terms. And I start from a very simple premise of there's only one life. You've got to make the most of it. And you have to be true to your own self about what you're really meant for and what you're going to really enjoy and find most meaningful. Mm-hmm. And in such pursuits, instead of being a conformist to what others would want you to do, you have to make your choices in an authentic manner. And I think at a young age, when I read The Fountainhead, I became clear I had to be an architect, impressionable as I was as a teenager. And it was, of course, a very exciting thing to do, a blend of art and science. And for someone who can be confused, especially as a teenager, as I was, I thought, let me hedge and actually sit in the middle of art and science, and architecture seemed just right. And then within that program, I soon discovered that actually there's a lot more learning to be done outside the classroom than inside. Mm-hmm. And I found some interesting research projects, and there were national competitions of all kinds. And I would throw my hat in that ring at every opportunity. Within such competition, there was one about tribal architecture and documenting that within India. Now India, as you know, is a vast country, and there are many tribes and there are many types of architecture and variety. And we chose a particularly incredible, adventurous, exotic place. It was set in the Himalayas, and it was a tribal settlement by Alexander's soldiers from 300 BC.
Wow, Alexander the Great.
That one.
From 300 BC.
From 300 BC.
Wow.
So this does go back a while, right? And effectively, this is during Alexander's invasion of the region back in that day. And in that treacherous terrain of the steep Himalayas, there was a mutiny by a band of soldiers of Alexander's army who at some point were disenrolled from that overall mission. They decided to hide from Alexander. And they found this little shelf on a ledge, let's call it, in a steep valley face in the Himalayas, where they could find a hiding place, and they created a settlement of their own. So it has Greek heritage, written all over it. It has motifs, carvings, and architecture that reflects that place and era.
Right.
And the way this came about, Patrick, was also very interesting, right? I mean, this is again a stage of life where you tend to be very unreasonable and kind of off the moment, which, by the way, I hope is a quality one preserves throughout life, right? There's no reason to give that one up, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Be unreasonable.
So, absolutely. And as long as you're not harming others, why not? This and in this instance, there was that kind of bravado where at the age of 18 and 19, I mean, this was 19 precisely when I actually went, but at that stage in life, when a fellow classmate and friend brought this magazine to the table, the magazine was called Discover India. Again, it's a magazine about exotic places and mysterious things and so on. And within that, there was this kind of centerpiece on this village called Malana. And it had all kinds of mysterious description about Alexander's legacy and stuff. And there was this temple face in a photo in the middle of the article. The temple facade was very richly done. Now, what you would consider typically tribal is typically a mud and thatched roof or something grass and bamboo. No, this was well built, hard timber, stone layering, amazing earthquake resistant architecture. And on top of that, you had amazing wooden carvings. And then there was a whole string of bones and skeletons and horns of animals hanging on this face. Wow. And the caption of the picture said, "Could some of these be human?" And the architecture looked amazing, and the mystery was quite a draw. And my friend and I, looked at each other, and we just high-fived each other, and we knew without even uttering a word, we're going here.
Interesting.
And you just kind of resolve totally randomly, unreasonably that this is something you've got to do. And there is an ongoing theme of a competition called tribal architecture in India. Then how can you not do this, right? Now, this is a ridiculous place to go to. People can't access it. The only way to reach there is trek, which is about 6 hours trek back in that day. Today, it's better connected. But at that time, a 6-hour trek from a very remote village at a base level, which again is fairly high up in middle Himalayas.
Yeah.
And you have to go there. There's no easy way to reach that base village. And then you have to trek from there. Now we're talking about early 90s, and there is no internet, of course. There's no mobile telephony even. And we are researching this place sitting in Mumbai now. The way to find information was also quite something, right? We had to go to some very old, rickety, dusty libraries, look for literature and documents and what is called a gazette, right? Which is
it sounds like the beginning of an Indiana Jones movie.
It is very, very close to that, frankly. I mean, nowhere as dramatic, but the makings are there. Effectively, Patrick, why I'm kind of fond of that mission is that there was no linear, reasonable, logical way in which anyone would do this. We were college students going to an impossible place where entry for outsiders is not even allowed because the villagers consider themselves the superior most tribe in the world and everybody else from the outside is seen as untouchable. So, and it's a very difficult terrain and, sub-zero temperatures and so on. So in that hostile environment, we nevertheless formed a team. I had to literally go to many people's houses and, basically convince parents of essentially these were kids and I was a kid at that time, convincing them that actually it is on us that will bring the sun alive. This is not a place where we would take girls at that stage in life, right? Not to be discriminatory, and some people, my wife complains as well, but it's not safe, etc. So with those assurances, we set about massive amount of research. But more than that, I think it's really intentionality. It is about having that kind of clear intention of making it happen against all odds. And it was fun, right? An intention in a space which is fun and you're not terribly attached to the point that if it fails, then you're miserable. You're not because it is fun, right? So even if it failed, we would be okay. I think that's a great place to be. And when you operate from that place, amazing things happen. I mean, the level of coincidences, right? So, for example, there were very, very few people on the planet who've been there before. One of them was a famous painter called Ram Rahman. the guy lives in New York, and travel and distance, etc., is a thing back in that day.
Right.
And we're sitting in Bombay, and I'm just thinking, how can we ever reach this man in New York? Should we write a letter? And email was still not there. If you imagine that era.
Yeah. That's how long ago it was.
And within the next 7 days, Ram Rahman is visiting Mumbai, exhibiting his photographs or paintings in a local exhibition there. And these kind of opportunities just then present themselves. So we obviously land there, we talk to him, we get some tips, we get a letter of recommendation to the local village chief who knew him. And we make connections like this, and ultimately we draw different lines of approach, get reference letters from people, make connections which are totally unimaginable, and ultimately land in this base village from which we were to discover the next steps. We had no assurance while setting out from Bombay, which is quite a trek to go to this place in the village itself in the Himalayas, as to what will happen next. But we knew we had to go there first and figure the rest. That's what we did. We were a team trekking up, and then we went there. We documented the place, which essentially is to say, as architecture students, we surveyed every nook and cranny, the layout, the contours, the house plans, how they look, all kinds of architectural documentation in tremendous detail. Right, we did that over 2 weeks. It was much lauded, much awarded, and so on. It was quite a well-recognized piece of work back in the day. And we came back with a successful mission. And, I was the first one to enter so many of these houses and photograph them from the inside, which they don't allow normally, right? So there were many kind of stories inside that story about how they let us in, what kind of sacrifices of goats and so on we had to do to purify our sins if we overstepped some line in the village. And there were all kinds of rituals that we had to go with. And the hostility had to be overcome, which we did gradually. And there were language barriers and all of that. But ultimately, that kind of made one realize that if you really set your heart and mission on something with a good intent, then all kinds of impossible things can happen. And then that became a bit of a kind of defining lighthouse piece for my life, because I hold that as a yardstick that, whatever I'm doing, can I exceed the level of impossibility that I faced at that time? Can I overcome the level of uncertainty, and can I show the level of intentionality in doing what I do, like what I did there, right? So it was very fortunate in that sense that actually it went well, and it became exemplary for my own limited sake.
Yeah. What was the main takeaway? What was the main learning for you from that experience? When you look back on it today, what was the most important thing you learned from that expedition, from putting that expedition together, from succeeding in pulling off something extraordinarily different?
Well, the biggest thing is almost nothing is impossible, right? I mean, to me, this became a bit of an example of that, because, if you actually sat calmly on a desk and thought about what we were about to undertake, and it was totally in the realm of unknown. I mean, the level of hostility is that you're not allowed to enter the village, right? We can read that in the documents we found in those dusty libraries. We can read how this is a unique classified tribe, which nobody can touch, nobody can approach. Don't even go there. We don't know the mysteries of the inside. We don't know what will happen, right? That's all documented. And yet there was a complete plunge into uncertainty. So dealing with uncertainty, the idea that anything is possible. And relatedly, intent can move, or intentions can move mountains, right?
Right.
So that was interesting.
Where do you think the initial interest and fascination with architecture always, where do you think that came from? Because one of the things that I find, interviewing so many people on this podcast and exploring kind of like the valleys of their career is, there's always an early influence by people on, from their parents, from an uncle, from something that they saw, from a close friend, right? It takes them in one direction, takes them in another direction. It might not always be the right direction. And I know, for example, having spoken to many Indians, you and I always joke that, I should have honorary Indian citizenship because I have so many Indian friends. I have more Indian friends than any other nationality by far. I can hardly think of like a friend of mine who's not Indian, right? But one of the things I noticed about India is that, the aspiration of many Indian families is, to have your son be a doctor, right? To have your son be a lawyer, to have your son be an engineer, which is not always the best path for that person. So in your case, two questions. One is, where did the initial interest in architecture come from? And then, of course, how do you go from architecture to business? Because you didn't end up being an architect.
Yes. Yeah. Good question. So the initial interest came from reading this book, The Fountainhead. Have you encountered Ayn Rand in
I
any
have
form?
not. I have not read. No, I have not read that. I have not.
So she was this revolutionary philosopher and an architect herself, if I get that
Okay.
right. This is in the early 1900s. And she had this kind of fantasy novel about this, idealistic architect who would stick to his principles and absolute trailblazer, thought leader, but then he would do things in what is quote unquote the right way and will overcome any obstacle in doing so. And he was totally committed to that. And it was a very heroic portrayal of an idealist architect. And I so related to that. I thought this is what I want to be. And I also thought that I actually have some aptitude for design, rightly or wrongly. In the 5 years after my course, I did actually practice architecture for 5 years. We built a reasonably good practice. My wife and I, we started this together. But equally, my dad was unconventional compared to many Indian parents, where he was fairly liberal in his approach that if you're clear this is what you want to do, son, go and do it. He's an engineer from the IITs himself, and I don't think it was easy for him to give up on that. But he kind of took the bitter pill and thought, if I really want to do that, then he should not be the one stopping me. So so that's how it happened. And then further to architecture, which is then leading up to the practice we built, and it was a very good practice. I mean, we got lucky. We got the first order of a car showroom for an unnamed foreign entrant, or a car company entering India, from a local dealer. And he said, we cannot reveal the name because of business confidentiality. And I'll give you the design guidelines and all of that. And we made the place. It turned out to be really good. And the clients from France were very happy as well. And they were from France because this was for Peugeot. So this is Peugeot entering India. And their first showroom and workshop were done by us. And we were in our early 20s at that stage. And the phone started ringing. I mean, the project went well. And then we were kind of named as the go-to architects for their dealer in their dealer handbook across the country. And we were getting a number of inquiries. And then there were other foreign car companies like General Motors, Hyundai, Fiat, all entering India in the mid to late 90s. So we actually made the most out of that. We grew the practice, became a team of 8. And then within about 4.5, 5 years of doing that, a question struck me. And this is where, a bit of an idealist mentality sometimes, for good or bad, catches up. And that mentality it's a litmus test, really. It's about, am I spending my time in the things I really, really want to do in my life?
Great question.
Right? I
Great
mean,
question.
and that's
I
a
was
test.
I was interviewing another guest a couple of months ago who actually asks himself that question every year as part of
Right.
an annual revision.
Right.
He sits down at the end of the year and he asks himself that question. It's a fascinating question. Am I spending my time doing the things that I want to be doing, right? That give me energy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Because, if you have to be true to yourself, you have to live your potential, you have to express yourself, and you do that in places which you think are really meant for you. And you need to be very present to that. Right. So, and I'm very introspective. In fact, overly so. I'm almost too analytical about these things. And then it struck me, actually, I became an architect for the creative pursuit that this is.
Right.
But in the 4.5 years, 4.5 years that I did this, the level of creative expression was actually fairly limited. And I was spending a lot of my time chasing contractors,
Right.
chasing client payments, and things which are sometimes harder in India than many other places, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. So that wasn't fun. And I was good at it. I was actually an administrator of my business
Right.
as a practice, right? And I was growing it well. It was all going really well. However, this is not my time spent allocation I really planned for.
Yeah.
So I challenged that, and then one New Year's Eve, this is 31st December 1998, because 99 you and I would meet in a few months.
Yeah, that's right.
So on that New Year's Eve, some MBA friends landed a very clear insight on me that actually the kind of things that I'm talking of I will enjoy, which is problem solving, variety, new challenges, living in different places and cultures, etc. There is one word which solves all of that, or two words: strategy consulting. I said, that sounds really cool. Fun variety kind of thing to do in your early career. But how does an architect... Sure.
Let me interrupt you there for 1 second.
Please.
This insight came across how? How did you come to that insight?
Right. So it was from a few different angles, right? So one is about what you feel yourself, which is about what I'm liking in the job is solving problems, right?
Right.
And I'm finding that I'm actually good at it. But then I'm also wary of the fact that this is getting monotonous. I'm solving the same kind of problems too many times. So there is no growth in there.
Right.
But I like it for the first part. Then I can see that having grown up in a limited environment, Mumbai is a big city, but nevertheless, it's a city, and I'm doing most of my work there at that stage. It seemed a bit confined, and that is quite obvious and apparent. And then you combine that with external feedback. There are these other friends which I was fortunate to have who are doing all kinds of post business school careers in banking and finance and some in consulting. And I'm able to combine their feedback with what I'm experiencing and arrive at the right answer in terms of, actually variety in problem solving, living in different parts of the world, entering different business contexts in which you solve problems would be a very interesting challenge to undertake.
So how much of this was due to the fact that you had this very kind of unique, varied group of friends around you?
Yeah, that was a big influence. And one in particular, my friend Mayur, he would particularly nudge me in this direction very hard. And that added up, yes. It was...
What would you say to people who potentially don't have a very varied group of interests? Because, the more I talk to people, the more I realize one thing that a lot of successful people say, which is, this old adage of you are a product of the 5 people that you spend the most time around with, right? So if you're living in the middle of middle America somewhere and you are surrounded by a whole bunch of people who basically do the same thing, right? Whether it's, you're a teacher in a middle school, or you're a truck driver, or you're an Uber driver, or you're a gardener, but you spend most of your time with the same people, how the hell do you then get out of that and get a different perspective from different people?
I think these are just circumstances, and circumstances shape us. There is no escaping that. The only solace I will offer in that context is that, from our vantage point, Patrick, it might look like there is lost potential there in your example.
Sure. Yeah.
But actually, look at all the contentment they might have.
They might. And if they're happy, look, I'm not going to knock it, right? I meet people at all sorts of walks of life who are very happy doing, what we would consider fairly mundane things. And then I meet the reverse. I meet people like you and I, working in private equity or in strategy consulting or running a startup, or, who have exited a startup and who are absolutely miserable because they set the ladder of their career against a certain mountain and they climbed that mountain. And once they got to the top, they realized they climbed the wrong mountain. And then they look across the valley and they see another mountain that would have been better for them. So, it's this is why it's so hard, because I don't think people spend enough time at the beginning of their careers or in their early years being introspective enough to get that insight. And it sounds like, you read a book, it had a massive impact on you, you pursued architecture, then you found yourself running a business. And then all of a sudden, because you were in this multifaceted group of people who were doing different things, you got a different insight, which was, hey, actually, I'm spending more time on the business side of this than the architecture side of this, and I actually enjoy that.
Exactly.
That's what I'm getting. Is that correct?
That is very accurate.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's about circumstances and how they add up, but equally you have to be present to those things around you and how you feel about the different aspects of your day to day, and which ones are you really enjoying more or not. So look, it is...
When it comes to enjoyment, though, Aseem, what's your reaction if I tell you, for example, and is this a fair statement, that the work that you were doing more on the business side and this idea more of strategy and problem solving was actually giving you a lot of positive energy every time you did that kind of work? Is that a fair thing to say?
Absolutely.
Did you? Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I'm a huge fan of flow.
Yeah.
The idea, the book, the philosophy, right?
Can you explain that a little bit for the audience? What is this idea of flow, and why does it matter when you talk about the context of your career and what you do for a living?
So flow is this concept which was born out of the work of a famous Hungarian American psychologist. I'm going
Mikhail
to he's called Mihi Csikszentmihalyi.
Csikszentmihalyi. Exactly.
Yeah,
He has
I mean, I'm
a
I'm
really
100% sure I
unpronounceable
got
last
that
name.
wrong. I got that wrong, but it's something like that. Okay.
It's Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not even gonna try and spell it. I think for
this
anybody
is
in the audience, if you just Google flow book, you will find it.
there is only one like that, and
Exactly.
he's since spelled as Mihaly, if I would call it that, right? The Hungarian pronunciation of Mikhail is what you just said, Mihail.
Mikhail, exactly.
Now, this gentleman came out with the most revolutionary concept, I think, which is about how do you really find meaning and enjoy your life in the day to day.
Right.
A mechanism for that is suggested as being in the flow state.
Exactly.
And the flow state is what you experience when you channelize your attention on certain activity or endeavor where you're feeling deep interest and passion, you're deeply engaged. There is a level of challenge. So it is engaging your faculties with a bit of a stretch as well. There is a healthy challenge involved.
Yeah.
It kind of has some aspects of Ikigai in it because, it takes your interest and passion. It takes the faculties that you probably are good at, and it is stretching those faculties in some form. And this occurs in all walks of life, work or play. We can be in flow right now in this conversation, right? Because it is making us think, it is making us engaged, right? So we are in flow right now. The idea there is the more time you spend in flow in your life, the better your life is.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if you really think about what you can achieve with your life, any big impact you will make, the world you will change, etc., it's all for the good. I'm a fan of that as well. But at the same time, from a personal satisfaction point of view, the biggest yardstick is in the moment to moment that you live. Are you actually fulfilling your potential? Are you expressing yourself? And the flow state is a good vehicle where all of these things happen.
Yes, yes.
It also necessitates presence, right? So when you talk about being present is important. Well, if you're in flow, you're necessarily present as well.
Yes, absolutely. And you're very self-aware, right? So I think one of the essential ingredients, which, I always work on with the leaders that I coach is, leadership and being in a state of flow partially is dependent on how self-aware you are, right? Some people are in a state of flow and they don't even realize it, which is normal because you're just in the groove and you're just like, it's like the scene with Brad Pitt where he's driving Formula One at the very end and he's racing towards the finish line. He's in that perfect state of flow where it's like, it's timeless, right? But
exactly
many people don't realize when they're in that state of flow, because you can also say that the reverse is true, right? The more time you spend doing things that drain you energy, you get into this reverse state of flow, which I think leads us to burnout, right? It has the opposite effect. So it sounds like you were finding yourself more and more in a state of flow as you were doing more of this problem solving business strategy component of it. And then if I understood you correctly, when you started talking to your friends who started sharing about what strategy consulting was all about, you were like, wow, that sounds like a job that is all about these kind of things that put me in a state of flow.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And, my kind of approach has been that if you then know the answer, that this is the better thing to be or state to pursue, then you have to take responsibility and absolute commitment to make that happen. Because you're not being in integrity if you know that that is actually the place you want to be, but then you will not do it either out of fear or out of some other constraints, right? So then you have to be totally going for it, unreasonable if it might be. So you just have to pursue it. You owe it to yourself to keep pursuing those things which will maximize your potential. And that's highly correlated with ultimately being in flow in any case, because when you're realizing your potential, you will be more and more in flow. Right? I mean, you can almost have a yardstick of your life about percentage time in flow every day.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great metric. But I think, if you think of your realization at that moment, right? And then How did that play into your decision to go into business school? And more importantly, was there any degree of fear of, okay, I'm going to leave this architecture career behind and I'm going to go I'm going to go to business school and I'm going to change careers? Was there a degree of fear? And if so, how did you get over that?
Yes, there was. There was. I mean, this was a very risky move. As you know, at INSEAD, we get people from all walks of life. Architects, biologists, and so on are still really rare. And you would find yourself surrounded by people who come from more traditional corporate backgrounds, business backgrounds, a lot of them from consulting and banking, as you know.
Yeah. Oh my God. There were a
Right.
lot. Yeah.
There are lots. So in some ways, the amazing stats we have about the placements and the kind of amazing jobs people end up with, etc., is all slam dunk and full credit to people who make it, and we all made it as well. But there is a bit of a linear, predictable path to people who come from such backgrounds and then go back to similar, if not the same kind of fields.
Yeah.
Right. So from my perspective, this was considered very risky. I had enough naysayers around me as well about what the hell are you doing, throwing this amazing practice. And we were giving up all that what we had earned as clients and goodwill. And then getting into a situation where I would be spending all my life savings so far. INSEAD is expensive. All good business schools are. And then you don't know after that, are you guaranteed something, because you come from a very, very different background, right?
Exactly.
So I took a pretty risky bet in that sense. But then it's fair to say we came out at such a good time in the year 2000 that there were too many options. And I think I went berserk in my risk mitigation by talking to too many companies and ending up with far more offers than I could even meaningfully engage with. And that was a sign of times in the run up to the .com crash, but well before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that happened. But I do want to touch upon the not Brazilian, but Latin Americans example that you creates a niggle in terms of, okay, there are people out there who may have that potential, but then how will they even come to know, right? And to which I say, sometimes within their limited realm and awareness, if they are content and happy, and maybe they are in flow driving a truck or pulling their tractor somewhere, or then that is fair game. And I mean, yes, it is great to create opportunities and exposure for everyone, but ultimately, if people are content in how they're spending their time day to day, I think that in itself is a blessing that we cannot underestimate.
Absolutely.
And especially us business school types can over-index on ambition quite a lot.
Absolutely. There's a lot of that. Yeah.
There's
especially
a lot of that, right?
Where I live here in Miami, there's a lot of people who, have been extremely successful financially. And, you can see that by the houses and the cars here. I mean, the houses and the cars in this place are nuts. But I have run into more than my fair share of people who you can tell these people are really not happy in many areas of their life, right? They have all the money, they have all the trappings of wealth, but something is missing, right?
Exactly. I think ultimately, there is a set pattern to our worldly ways about what's important and what people pursue. But in that mix, I think people have forgotten the simple art of contentment and what are you spending your time on, and living in the present, moment to moment, relishing it. I think that quality is precious. Never take it away.
Absolutely. Now, so you go to INSEAD, you go to business school. Then, if I'm not mistaken, you have a bunch of offers, as you mentioned. You leave INSEAD. You start off your career in a diamond cluster, right? You and I ended up in the same firm in strategy consulting. So, do you get a little bit of that strategy consulting kind of like cake to you that you were looking for? And then following that, you seem to go into a series of different startup entrepreneurial opportunities, right? You have a very unusual career from the perspective that you've switched industries a lot of times. You've seen a lot of different business models. What's been a little bit your inner compass when it comes to choosing the next career opportunity? Like what questions do you ask yourself, and what's your process as you go through figuring out what's next?
That does make me think, Patrick, and that's a great question. Let me define this. It exists for sure, the compass. So I guess the key elements there are in each of these changes, right? I'm asking myself, what am I spending my time on today? And what will this new thing make me spend my time on? Which is ultimately about optimization. It's about It's optimizing for creativity. It is optimizing for interest, for passion. It is optimizing for family time as well. For example, from consulting to doing my own startup, it was equally about not being on a plane every week or on a few planes every week, which
Yeah,
is
I
typical.
remember how much we flew around. Oh my God. It was crazy.
So that is one aspect. But the fact that you're building something of your own, that is very exciting. And equally, if I rewind the clock and when I started consulting, that itself was also very exciting, right? So there's
Right.
something about freshness of the challenge as well. And there is something about when you've done something on repeat pattern, are you learning as much? Are
Right.
you as much in the kind of faculty? Are you engaging your faculties rather in the ways you want, right? Are you?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
are you?
It's funny because Tony Robbins talks about this a lot. He talks about the 6 different human needs. And one of the things that he says is one human need is variety, right? It's the fact that as human beings, some of us more than others, and some of us at different times of our lives, need to experience different things. It sounds like so. Is that what you're referring to? It's this need to try new things.
It is that. That
Mhm.
is definitely an axis by itself, the variety.
Yeah.
It is also about impact
Yeah.
as to in each setting,
Yeah.
incrementally, will you make more impact in this next thing that I'm evaluating, right? So for example, from going consulting to building what became the largest aggregation of sightseeing tours and experiences in the world,
Yep.
to me, took me back all the way to that sounds like a Malana level challenge. Starting from zero, we will go in and we will create the largest aggregation of tools and experiences. And we'll build a platform for that as
Right.
pioneers, right? Uncharted territory, right? So the excitement of that challenge, the impact it has on people's lives in terms of what it makes possible for travelers to, pre-book and make the most out of their holiday travel, etc.
Right.
Very exciting to me in terms of what we can contribute and make a difference on that. So my co-founder and CEO who came from the industry and myself, we got together, we wrote the business plan and put our life savings into it and took
Mhm.
that plunge. So it was very risky, but there were all these things about variety, challenge, impact it will have. And the challenge also measured up in terms of looks very hard, but if we apply ourselves, we can do it.
Yeah, it's what why was impact so important to you? Tell us
Just
more about that.
Yeah, I just don't think
Because I hear
there
that word a
is.
lot.
Yeah, so I I read impact as contribution, right? A life inherently, at least from what I've seen, may not have too much purpose. I've really looked for one.
Mhm.
And I figured actually what gives me meaning all the time is about, can I make a difference? Can I make an impact? And that is the same thing as, am I contributing? Right. So, by the way, on a different tangent, Patrick, I also believe in karma, right?
Mhm.
So the way this triangulates in my own head is that if you are living in a context of surrender and acceptance, that you are dealt the hand that you're dealt in terms of your environment, your setting, your family, you control where you work, etc., to some extent. But on a more day-to-day basis, you are where you are, and so you accept it, right? You don't question it every day. And in that acceptance, you have to find, how will I make a difference? How will I contribute? And that spells out your responsibilities, your actions, your tasks, or your karma. You then need to just fulfill those things and make the difference that you can in that environment and focus on what you can control,
But
right?
how do you define contribution? Because you've mentioned contribution a lot, but what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so that happens at different levels, right? You contribute directly to the people you work with, right? As a leader, you are coaching, guiding, steering. You're contributing to people's kind of career directions and learning trajectories and lives on the one hand. On
Yeah.
the other hand, the sum total of that is how the organization then contributes to the external world in terms of, for example, at Health Hero, where I am now, we deliver digital healthcare across 4 countries in Europe. We are the market leader in that. We reach more than 30 million lives. And the fact that we are able to do these things in a very effective digital delivery mode where patients are or users are able to access the service seamlessly in so many ways, from portals, web apps, and other channels. And the fact that there is seamless access to healthcare And there is a very efficient delivery behind it from clinicians, which basically unlocks efficiency in a world where clinical time is mighty constrained. So the fact that you can make it more efficient clinically, and the fact that you can make it more seamless for the patient is a contribution in sum total to society at large.
Right. But then you just hit the nail on the head, though, right? It's when I hear what you just said there, to quote what you just said, to make a contribution to the society at large, right? So it sounds like over the course of one's career, you shift from a focus on significance, right? And oftentimes my significance in society is the need to be seen. It's the need to be seen as successful. It's the need to have the fancy car, the house on the beach, X amount of money in my bank account, X number of board roles, whatever, be CEO, be VP, be whatever. And eventually it sounds like you get to a point in your career, at least from what I'm hearing, you were starting to go down that direction. In your case, where it's not as much about significance, although significance is still important, but it sounds like it's more about contribution as it's defined as the need to give beyond yourself and to help others. How's that as an assessment?
That is fair. In fact, unsurprisingly, that aligns with stakeholdership as well. Because
Absolutely.
if you're contributing to employees, investors, customers, and in sum total the society, the kind of idea of business management was that. Now, of course, we are all distracted to some extent or more extent by significance and other things that come along the way. But ultimate contentment really doesn't come from that. That you and I know. And I think by this stage in life, one wisens up to those things as well. So, of course, I've chased significance and title and all of those things
Oh, we
as
all
well in
have.
my life. But
We all have, yeah.
but by this time,
But the returns are short lived.
the returns are short-lived, and it is incredible if you take the kind of really macro view at not just a world but at a universe level, right? And we all know that this is just not even a moment of time on a speck of dust.
Yeah.
And that's what we are here, as dwelling that little speck. And frankly, in that ultimate cosmos, this just has no meaning, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, instead of that long-term significance, if one actually dwells on moment-to-moment contribution, I think there is far more contentment, presence, flow, and life satisfaction from that.
What advice would you give somebody who maybe is listening to this, watching us, who maybe is midlife, somewhere between 45 and 60, feels successful on paper, but is not getting that fulfillment, is not feeling that they are contributing? What should they do?
I think people need to have the courage and give themselves the freedom to be completely authentic, right? What that means in practical terms is go away in silence, figure out what you're really, really about, what makes you tick, what are your real interests, what did you want to be when you were a child?
Yeah, I love that one.
And somewhere, I think this child dimension is important in more ways than one. I'll stay on that tangent and I'll come back to your question. But the other thing that children have besides a dream and an aspiration is a sense of wonder.
Yes, that's very true.
And you look at people around us and how many of us have retained any degree of sense of wonder? And that correlates with gratitude, that correlates with being present, that correlates with being fascinated with life itself. And if you're not having that in your life, it is because you're either not spending time with the right things, on the right activities, or with the right people, or you're not searching for what you're really about and realigning to those interests, right? So you just have to be that much present to your own hidden charter of your own life.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I was at an event here in Miami a few months ago in November, and they interviewed some of the top people in business and sports. They had Rafa Nadal, Serena Williams, Jeff Bezos, Eric Schmidt, Ken Griffin from Citadel. They had some really remarkable people, Jamie Dimon. And they asked them what were the three things that they credited with their success in life and in business. And they all basically said the same thing, which I found fascinating. They said curiosity, right, which goes a little bit to your sense of wonder.
Yeah.
The second one was humility, because of course, when you're constantly trying new things, you're going to fail a lot, right? Things are going to fuck up and you're going to be like, you feel like an idiot when you try something and it doesn't go well often, right?
Yeah.
So your sense of humility helps you start over and not so worry so much about failure or defeat. And then the third thing that they talk about, which I think that you've probably been through a lot of this as well in your career, is resilience, right? It's this need that since you're going to be curious and humble and go out and try a lot of things, you're going to get knocked on your ass a lot, which means you need to be able to get back up and think about what you learned and hopefully emerge stronger.
Yeah.
What would you say in your career so far, and now looking at what you're doing with Health Hero, which has definitely been hard. I mean, cobbling together 4 companies in 7 months is not easy, and growing at that speed, we know private equity moves at fast speeds, right? That's not for the faint of heart. What's your formula for bouncing back? How do you overcome adversity and come back stronger when times get very tough?
Right. Yeah. By the way, it was joining of 7 companies in about 8 months. You have to be more.
Okay, so it's even worse.
To be more precise.
It's even harder.
Yes, and it is actually much harder as a startup because you're not infrastructured to do these things. You don't have a corp dev team or an M&A team, right? You're a startup.
Exactly.
So you're cobbling together things in a hurry and making it streamlined. But to your question about adversity and how I deal with that in the situation, look, commitment I think is the more important keyword here than resilience. Let me explain. So with commitment, you are taking a stance, you're having a strong intention, and then you will throw yourself at it and do everything it takes. Now, resilience may or may not reflect itself in the process, but resilience I find normally is rooted in the idea that you fail and it is so miserable, and then you're able to cope with it. And resilience has a bit of a connotation of facing failure and so on. But to me, facing failure is an issue when you have significance. If you yourself do not have significance in the matter, and you're just pursuing the cause, irrespective of how you look in the process, I think it is just pure commitment then. You see, the strength of commitment is adequate to just see you through. And look, these are correlated. I don't deny that.
Is that commitment or is that purpose?
Is there a difference? I'm thinking it's probably the same.
That's a good question, right? Because I may have promised that I'll do something for you, and I'm committed to it because I have told you I'll do it. But if I am driven by purpose, then I have a much bigger reason for doing it.
Right. So to me, these are interchangeable in some ways. But the way I would frame it is, purpose in this example would be the North Star of what you're actually pursuing.
Right.
But every action, every task, every little thing you will do, and every wound you will scratch and get up and then start running again is commitment. So commitment is the little task and every step in that direction of pursuing that ultimate purpose, the goal that you set. And yes, one can say that you have to be resilient in doing so, but resilience almost sounds like ability to cope with failure. But where is failure if you're not significant?
It's a good question. I mean, this is why, I as you know, I do a lot of keynote speaking, all around the world. And one of the things I get asked by a lot of organizations to talk about is, how do you bounce back in an age of artificial intelligence when everything is changing so quickly, right? There's a lot of people who are having to make a lot of change very, very quickly. And when you're making change very, very quickly, chances are very good that you're going to fail. Because you're going to try something and it's not going to work the first time, right? You're going to write the prompt incorrectly, or you're going to write the prompt and it's going to give you a response that wants to flatter you instead of the response that you actually need. And
exactly.
so the funny thing is, when I talk about, our ability to kind of like push through and make massive change and become resilient, I came to the conclusion that there's these 5 pillars that help you become resilient. And one of those pillars is our ability to reframe failure, right? You talked about it from the perspective of one of the reasons why you wanted to continuously change careers, right? Was growth, right? You see an opportunity, but you also feel that you need to grow and you need the variety, and then you want the contribution. Growth is amazing, but by default, growth is going to require pain. Right? If you look at it from a weight training analogy, this is the thing that they always tell you: when you're most hurting in the gym, that's where the growth is coming from, and it hurts. And the same thing can be said about any kind of career. When you're having that growth and it's painful and it hurts and you're able to push through it, that's when you toughen the resilience muscles. That's when you're able to get through it more easily.
Yeah.
And in your case, since you've done so many hard things, going all the way back to, your architectural expedition in the Himalayas, right? That kind of set the tone for you at a very early age. It gave you that confidence. It gave you the ability to do something very hard so that you can kind of connect back always to that ability. And then every time you do something hard, it becomes even stronger, right? The resilience muscle is growing and growing and growing and growing. And so the next hard thing that you do, it's not that it's not hard anymore, but it's not as daunting anymore. And you've developed the techniques to get through it. You see what I'm saying?
That is absolutely, and it makes it sound more exclusive and original than it actually is. I really think, Patrick, that if you focus on commitment rather than success and failure, this is another way of saying, and you heard this before, it is commitment with detachment from the result. That's the zone to be in. Because the moment you're in that zone, you're not worried about failure. You're not relishing your success because it's not about you. Success and failure happen to you.
Exactly.
Right? And that's where resilience is needed in you.
Exactly.
But commitment is actually outside. It's not in you. Commitment is for the things that you will make happen outside. Yes, you are committed, but it is to the things outside you. So your focus is not inward, it's outward. Right?
Exactly.
So the beauty of that is it detaches you. And the beauty of detachment is that you're not afraid because it's not about you.
Right. You're more committed to the process than to the destination. It's the journey, not the destination.
Yes.
They did an interview of Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant, years ago, and they asked him, Kobe, what kind of athlete are you? Are you the athlete that is just obsessed with winning, or is it more about the fear of losing? Which I thought was an interesting question, and his answer was amazing, and his answer was neither. He's like, I'm the athlete who's in it for the learning.
Wow. There you go.
Right? It's not about the obsession with winning or the fear of losing. It's about the journey. So I think it seems to speak a little bit to what you're saying.
And Patrick, this comes back to the philosophy of karma, right? Which perhaps is another episode altogether.
Yeah, probably.
But that is the realm. Commitment without detachment is the realm of karma.
Yes.
So look, you're right about the level of change people will need to navigate and the kind of hard things they will need to undertake or kind of do a self-operation or surgery on themselves in terms of coming out on the other side of the big changes and how they will hit people. But I think people need to come out of fear and get into a mode of possibility and being very inspired by a target state that they define for themselves out of their own sense of meaning, their own sense of interest, their passion, etc.
Yeah.
Write their own charter and pursue it without fear, because what's the worst thing that will happen even if people fail, right? And I don't make light of that. I don't think it's easy for everyone to fail, because in a material world, there are levels of threshold you can't breach in your failure.
Yeah.
You need to have your house, you need to eat. So to that end, you need to have the minimum level of practical sustenance. And after that, you have to go for the big hits of possibility rather than trying to protect yourself all the time. Because from what I've seen, majority of people, at least that we meet, right? Even if they have a failure or few, they will survive. It's not a question of survival, right? But if you don't go for that big change and big leap, the possibility of thriving and finding something truly inspiring is foregone.
I agree. Last question before we wrap up with our lightning round of questions, which is 3 quick questions, 3 quick answers. Sure. I ask the same questions to each guest. I wanted to ask you this last question on the very topic that you just spoke of, because it's so important, right? When I've worked with leaders and organizations or done group work with teams, everybody right now is in this crazy state where we're all just drinking from a fire hose of information and trying to adapt and change as the world is changing at an exponentially faster rate around us. What would you tell somebody, or what advice or tip would you give somebody to overcome their fear and step out of their comfort zone and try something different, whether it's, I don't know, a new way of working, a new process you have to change, launching a new product, launching a new business, changing careers, changing company. We all face this moment when we know we need to do something different, right? Maybe that speaks to the variety, right, that we need or we want to make a contribution. But so many people get stopped by fear and it just paralyzes them. What techniques or what have you done to overcome fear when you've come face to face with it?
Right. So let me take this in two parts about generally what I would say to people in preparation for AI and the change relatedly and navigating careers. I mean, from an AI perspective, I think this is in chess parlance, this is the opening. You have a middle game and an end game. In the middle game, I see AI and humans together, and it is really joint working and human in the loop in every walk of life. So what you need to do is prepare for this middle game first, which is human in the loop, and then see whether you are on the technical side of driving the AI or are you on the human side of complementing the expertise that AI might lack. And in the
Right.
meantime, you are holding fort by being the backup to AI as
Right.
as a human checker. If AI is a maker, you are the checker. And in healthcare, for example, in the foreseeable future, you have to have clinicians in the loop. No regulation is going to let it completely loose and leave it entirely to AI in the next few years. Now, maybe even in 7 years, it's a very different world, but at least in the next 3 to 5, I would argue
Yeah.
that human in the loop is the dominant scenario, right? And that's true
Yeah.
in many industries.
Agree.
Right? So in the middle game, you play to that mix and see which side you fall on. But you have to be very clear about which side you're on and how.
Yeah.
And in the end game, now that's a much harder one. Okay, this is uncharted territory where, let's say, AI does take over. Right now, in that era of super intelligence, whether that happens in 7 years or whether it happens in 17, that should come at some point. And at that point, I think it's really about backing into some things which are very hard for AI to do. I really do
Right.
think there are some last bastions which may take the longest for AI to totally invade. I read about professions like gardening and plumbing and being a chef and so on.
I'm spending more time with my plants this weekend.
You're on the right track. So doing those things, which some of these, if they're of your interest, great, right? But there is a societal question as well about how you allocate resources in that direction and ultimately in the direction of saving the planet while making sure everybody has a universal basic income out of the sheer economic gain that AI should enable, right? So there is that world possibility as well, which comes into the equation in the end game, and it's not without governments and policy that you will reach there. But it's a middle game you need to worry about right now. Yeah. Now talking about, I think your second part of the question was about how I navigate adversity.
Yeah, what tools or techniques do you use to overcome fear when you find that emotion welling up in your chest, right? What do you do?
So I find that I haven't found anything which we can't solve if you really apply yourself. And the way to do that in practical terms is, one, I break down problems and issues into parts and sometimes micro parts, because sometimes it can be an issue, for example, a big organizational issue, right? Where you have to think about uh, the process, the team, the impact on others at the same time. So you'll break it down in parts and then you will actually solve it part by part and think through each part, because you can get overwhelmed in soaking in the entire problem. But when you make it into manageable parts, it is generally easy to overcome in steps, right? So you have to maintain your cool to break things down into parts, number one. And number two, I find that if I have narrowed down on the part that is bothering me the most, or the parts that are bothering me the most, right? And dwell on it, especially if I take that problem in my mind, even to my sleep, and it's not disturbing me too much. It is something I'm willing to dwell on. And then in the morning, with a clear mind, with a piece of paper in my hand and cup of tea on the on the other, I'm able to actually sit and focus and think through. I often keep my morning time just clear to solve the hardest problems. And hardest here is completely relative, right? I don't think I have too many of them. But whatever is bothering you, if you can get that out of the way first, it also clears your mind to focus on other things and be more productive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good idea. So the takeaway here is break it down to smaller chunks so you can focus on individual chunks, and also your state of mind, right? Which is always going to be better in the mornings because ostensibly you've had hopefully a good night's sleep. Also helps in having clarity to be able to solve the problem. That's great. 3 lightning rounds.
Last point on that, Patrick.
Of course.
I would add, and then this is one of my favorite tips from Naval Ravikant. I don't know if you've read the guy.
Yeah, I have read his book, The Almanac. Yeah.
He's amazing, right?
Great book.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan. And one of the things he says is the best creative exercise you can do for practically free is take a long shower.
So true.
No,
that is so true. I have a shower notebook that when I some of my best ideas come in the shower, and I know I'm not the only one, right? And I have a shower notebook. I get out of the shower and I freaking write in the notebook because sometimes I get the best ideas when I'm in the shower.
Absolutely. So you need a voice note taker in the bathroom, by the way. That's what I'm getting to now.
There you go. There's a new product. There's for Kickstarter.
It's absolutely out there, and it's just very powerful, in fact. And it's AI powered now.
Absolutely.
But awesome. Go for the quick.
All right, the lightning round, because we are way over time. But this has been a fascinating conversation, regardless. So 3 quick questions, 3 quick answers. Question number 1 for you is: if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
It would be to read people's minds.
Very cool. Yeah, I like that one too. If you could have dinner with any person in history, alive or dead, who would it be?
Mahatma Gandhi.
Okay. I thought you might say Alexander the Great, but hey. And last but not least, what one word of advice would you give to a young person who is looking for a career that gives them meaning and purpose?
Be true to yourself. It's more than a word.
Yes, it is, but it works. Aseem, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. I love your honesty, your authenticity, your openness, your curiosity. I think from the early journey in the Himalayas, which really shaped you as the person that you are today, to now running Health Hero across Europe and putting together all these companies to make an impact, to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. I think your story is inspiring, and your tips and life lessons very helpful for a lot of people. So I want to thank you for being on the show, for sharing all these tips, your journey, and your stories with all of us. I hope people have a chance to take something away from it. Where can people learn more about Health Hero or about you or what you do?
healthhero.com is our website. I post it to you as well. We can put it in the comments.
Fantastic.
And I'll share my LinkedIn as well. So that will cover that. Thank you for the opportunity, Patrick. It was a fun conversation, and you do make me think and reflect, and that's always a nice little stretch in the evening. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And folks, for those of you who tuned in today, don't forget to subscribe to the show. Leave us any comments. Like the show if it had an impact on you. And most importantly, share the show with somebody else who might be struggling. There's a lot of people out there out of work. There's a lot of people with a lot of uncertainties, some of which are trying to make career decisions, career pivots. Hopefully this conversation has a couple of nuggets of wisdom that will be useful to these people. And, you'll find more information about Aseem, about Health Hero and other things in the show notes. And we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you for tuning in. Stay curious, stay humble, and keep growing.